But what I'd like to talk about is that everything is on schedule. The world is falling apart right on schedule. And we have to understand this, that we've had a belief about what evolution was predicated on, and we always focus on the nature of genes. That we would see that genes were controlling the traits and characters, and as you go up the evolutionary scale, there's going to be more genes and more character and traits evolving from these genes. And it turns out this is totally false. The whole idea about genes has been a totally misunderstood belief system that we bought into, that genes control life. Genes control nothing. Genes are blueprints. That's exactly what they are. And why that's relevant is we've been focusing on the blueprints and giving them self-realization, that they make a decision, a gene turns on and a gene turns off. And it turns out this is totally false. And the problem with this belief system, because it permeates our structure of the world, is that people perceive themselves as victims of a world because their genes are controlling them and they can't control their genes according to that belief. I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time years ago. I was cloning stem cells about 46 years ago. There was just a handful of us in the entire world that even knew what the hell a stem cell was. I did this study, and it's just so brief and so profoundly important. I just want to say what it represented. I would isolate one stem cell, which is an embryonic cell. Stem cells are embryo cells. The moment before you're born, I could say, here's an embryo cell, and then a moment after you're born, I look at the same cell and say, now it's called a stem cell. So that's what it represents. And the reason we have stem cells, and all of you have them because you are here, is the fact that every day we lose, as Carl Sagan would say, hundreds of billions of cells are dying every day, and we have to replace them. So we are growing every day of our lives by necessity. If you stop growing, if you stop the stem cells, you'll die right off. That's what it's going to be about. So the point about it is we all have these stem cells, we have these embryonic cells. I'd isolate one cell, put it in a petri dish by itself. It divides every 10 or 12 hours, so after a week I have about 50,000 cells in the petri dish, but they all came from the same parent. So I have 50,000 genetically identical cells in the petri dish. The experiment that I did is just mind-boggling because it was so simple and profound, is I would take cells out of the master dish and put it into another petri dish and change the environment, the culture environment. Cells live in the equivalent of a synthetic blood that we make in a laboratory called culture medium. And by changing some of the composition of that culture medium, I put these cells from the main dish into this dish, and the cells form muscle. And I go back to the very same dish of stem cells, put them into a second petri dish with another environment, and they form bone. And I go back to the very same dish and put cells into a third petri dish with a different environment, and they form fat cells. Well, you're left with a very important and very profound question. What controls the fate of the cells? The answer, first of all, they were all genetically identical, so you can't invoke the genes as controlling this. It was the environment. My work on trying to understand how the environmental signals lead to the control of genes, which is now a new science since 1990. I saw this in 1967 and wrote about it, but it took 1990 until science recognized a new branch of science called epigenetics. And it's the most profound revolution in the world for a very important reason. When I say genetic control, it literally means control by genes. That's the belief, oh, genes cause this and genes cause that, which is false. Epigenetic sounds like the same thing, epigenetic control, but epi is the entire revolution that this planet will pivot upon. For the reason is this, the prefix epi means above. So when I say epigenetic control, then I'm literally saying control above the genes. Well, that becomes important because when we always look for control, we always go to the genes. Now we're saying, well, where's the control above the gene? It led me to an understanding of what's called the cell membrane, the skin of the cell. And the relevance is that the skin of the cell is an information processor. It reads the environment, and it sends signals into the cell and to the genes to control the biology of the genes to live in an environment that's always changing. So the membrane is the nervous system of the cell. Just to let you know, in the development of a human, the outer layer of the embryo is called ectoderm. It's a skin. The skin gives rise only to two things in humans, skin and nervous system. So like the cell, our nervous system comes from this outer layer. Well, the significance about that, it led me to an understanding of how the cell worked and all that stuff, but it also led me to understand this. Evolution is, the way we perceive it, is a scale of increasing awareness. And so we make a whole evolutionary list.